Okay, so today we have the great pleasure of having Sean and Chloe, who are our University of Colorado REDCap administrative team, presenting on REDCap, the project lifecycle. I myself am very interested to learn about what they have to say since I use REDCap in my daily work. So I will let you both take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the intro, Lauren, and it's nice to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the first day of CU Data Week. I hope that some of this information will help some of you, and if not, maybe it's just a good refresher. So I will just go ahead and introduce ourselves again. So my name is Chloe Wildman. I'm here with Sean Sullivan as well. As Lauren mentioned, we are the University of Colorado REDCap administrators. Really what that means for us is that we provide our users like yourselves technical support when it comes to using REDCap. And we try to help encourage high quality, streamlined data collection for all of our teams and our affiliates. So today, what we wanted to talk to you about is the REDCap project lifecycle. And we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a second. But overall, we'll be covering the major established milestones in a project's full lifespan. And then while we talk about that, we also wanted to show you some key features or key considerations during those phases. This is just kind of a disclaimer, though, that this is by no means a comprehensive, in-depth coverage of everything there is to offer in every phase. I think we would need all of CU Data Week to get through the majority of that. But we are hoping that what we highlight today will be especially useful, particularly for this audience. So before we get too far into things, last year we also presented during CU Data Week, and that presentation was an introduction to REDCap. So to keep things fresh, this year our presentation is assuming a basic knowledge of REDCap. That way we can chat a little bit more about additional features and complexities of REDCap. If you didn't get a chance, though, to see that, or if you find yourself at all lost during this presentation because you don't have that basic knowledge, I do encourage you to check out that video. You can find a link to it on these slides and then also in the CU Data Week website under the 2025 recordings. And the last thing before we really get into things is just a few helpful links for you all. So these topics are covered in our presentation last year, but we wanted to make sure that you just had those beginner resources at your fingertips. So you can find these links on our slides. It'll take you to our team's help center, and then I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just in case you're curious about what is REDCap, who can use REDCap, and how you get a UCD REDCap account. One other thing to note is just that if you look through these slides, you'll find these question mark icons, just like you're seeing on screen now, and that's links to our articles. So we've provided those as supplementary content because we can't get into, the full details of everything in this session, just to give you some more information about the topics that we're covering. So please check those out if you're interested. All right. So actually getting into the content. Broad overview is that a project's life cycle looks like this. So we're going from top to bottom here. You begin in development, and then you proceed to production for data collection. Then you go to analysis and cleanup when you're finished actively collecting data. And then you finish it up by marking your project as completed once everything is done. We will share some more details on each of the steps as we go along. But let's start with development. So development mode begins once your project is created. It's essentially born in development mode. This is where there are no restrictions on your modifications because the assumption is that you haven't collected any real data in your project. So that basically means that the system is assuming no real data will be harmed by the changes that you're making. So this is, an opportunity to highlight that it's very important that you don't collect real data while you're in development mode. You should always move to production before you collect live data. The link on this slide elaborates further on this topic, but just to cover the bases, number one, it is in most cases impossible for our team to recover lost data when your project is in development mode. Number two, you'll learn about this a bit more later, but the production process includes reviews from our team, and that's to help with data quality and encourage regulatory compliance, so it can help improve your project on the way to production before you have live data collected. And then the last part is because there is an assumption that you don't have any real data in the project, you're not going to be warned when changes that you make will significantly impact the existing records that you've already collected, whereas you are warned or even prevented from doing so in many cases in production mode. The last bullet here is just that All features, especially related to survey distribution and data entry, are available during development mode. If you have some trouble finding something, please feel free to reach out. It's likely not because you're in development mode. There's probably just a sneaky setting that you're missing in the project. And with that in mind, this is again another opportunity to say, we highly encourage folks to test their projects thoroughly before they move to production mode, because those changes will be so much more controlled later on. So for example, if you plan to distribute survey links, you can use your own email as the participant and then walk through the project as if you were the participant. And that'll help iron out any issues before they ever arise while you're actively working with participants. One question you might have at this point is, how do I know if my project is in development mode or what phase it's in? And we'll talk about this as we go through, and many of you may already know. But what I'm showing here on this page is a screenshot from your My Projects page. And you can find this if you log in. You'll have multiple tabs at the top. One of them is My Projects. It'll give you a list of all of the projects that you're on, along with some information about them. And I have a screen grab of 2 of these projects. So if you'd like, please go ahead in the chat and drop which option A or option B, that you think is in development mode based only on this screenshot. And I am working on getting Zoom to open up chat for me. There we go. Perfect. Yes, I'm getting A's. So that is correct. So you can tell based off of this little wrench over to the right here. And then also when you're actually in the project, under the project setup page, there's this project status section where you can check on the status of your project. The option below it, option B, is in production, that check mark that you're seeing there. That's right, Carrie. Yeah, the wrench seems key. All right. So now let's hand it over to Sean to talk about some key features while in development mode.
Thank you, Chloe, and bear with us. There are going to be a few different points where we're just pivoting between tabs. Let's make sure that's doing what it should be doing. Can you just let me know when you can see that, Chloe?
Yes, I will. There it is. It's here.
Okay, cool. No delays like the other day. That's great. So as Chloe kind of hit on, we want to go through some key features that are important to consider at different stages. There are so many different configuration options to consider when you're in development mode, but we really only have so much time. I'm going to talk about 2 today, and then also discuss the user face elements in real time by sharing kind of a REDCap project that we put together. But first topic I want to hit on is user rights. So user rights are vital to ensuring that proper access is kind of set up within your project. It controls user behavior. We have a bunch of articles on this topic that I highly recommend reviewing if you are managing a REDCap project at any point. Before diving into the actual demo, I do want to hit on 2 key points, which are that different permissions are allowable based on the type of training an individual has completed. So full training is our 2-hour training module, while our basic training module is about 45 minutes. This will dictate what permissions you're allowed to receive. And what permissions you should be assigning to folks. This is managed at the project level. Our team does not have a system level control yet. Very soon we will on how to control this. So just keep an eye on that. If you're ever unsure of someone's account type, you can reach out to us, which we'll talk about at the end. And the second thing I want to hit on is applying the principle of least privilege. Principle of least privilege, in short, is just saying that we want to provide the lowest amount of rights necessary for an individual to perform their standard day-to-day activities in a software. So specifically with REDCap, we want to make sure that folks only have permissions that allow them to do what they need to do, and they cannot do more. Now, let me go ahead and switch over to my browser. Chloe, can you just let me know if that pops up good?
Yep, I can see your browser. You might want to zoom in a little bit though.
Thank you. Perfect. So when I am within a REDCap project, on my left-hand sidebar under the applications heading, I can go ahead and click user rights. That is going to generate a page where I have a few different options, and it also lists all the users that are currently active on the project. I'm kind of just going to go down the line and talk about things. So first, we can add a user with custom user rights. I'm going to go ahead and type in the username of my test account. We'll go ahead and click there. And wonderful. As you can see, I'm met with a plethora of different permissions. I'm not going to go through each of these in detail just because it would take all day, but I do want to talk about kind of the broad categories and what they mean for folks. So our highest level privileges are going to be project design and setup, user rights, and data access groups. These are essentially things that can have a major impact on your project and the way it operates. So project design and setup, intuitive title. It allows folks to go ahead and create instruments, modify event structures if you're in a longitudinal project, and a bunch of the things that can be really scary but can also be very powerful within your project. User rights means that whoever can access user rights in a very specific way. So no access is obvious. An individual won't be able to see or touch user rights. Read only means that individual will be able to see the user rights assigned to any individual in the project, but won't be able to modify them. And then full access means that you can edit the user permissions of other folks within the project, including yourself if you have this permission. So this is a very powerful permission, as it means I can add users as well as update the users on this page. Data access groups are a very beneficial feature for multi-site projects. We won't be diving too deep into that today, but I definitely recommend investigating that if you're working on a multi-site project. We then break into other privileges. So things like how we can distribute surveys, whether it's sharing public survey links, setting up email notifications, a lot of different ways of organizing and tracking our projects like logging and email logging. Another thing to highlight here is that any optional modules typically appear in this section. So randomization, for example, I have the randomization module enabled on my project, so I have additional permissions that are going to populate here that will allow individuals to interact with randomization and REDCap in different ways. So there are subcategories of those permissions. Scrolling down, there are also separate permissions for the REDCap mobile app. We have permissions around being able to create, rename, or delete records, and also record locking permissions. If I scroll back up, though, there are two key categories that I want to provide a little more focus on, which are data viewing rights and data export rights. So more or less what it sounds like, data viewing rights dictate what an individual is able to see and touch in REDCap, while data export rights means what can they take out of REDCap. These are broken into four different categories. I want to just kind of run through what each of those categories means very quickly. So the no access category means that an individual will not be able to see an instrument when under the data viewing rights. They will not be able to see an instrument. They will not be able to access the instrument in any capacity. Read only, it means that an individual will be able to look at a data entry form or instrument within REDCap, but they will not be able to make modifications to that instrument, so they won't be able to enter data. View and edit means that an individual will be able to enter data into a given instrument. And again, this is set at, I have 6 instruments in this project, so we set this at the instrument level. You can customize this so specific forms cannot be accessed while other forms can, and we can interact with those forms in different ways. So on that topic, you can see here there is a category with some checkboxes, edit survey responses. This option will only appear if an instrument has been configured as a survey, because that's the only time this option will apply. But this essentially dictates whether an individual is able to update participant submitted responses, so survey responses. So if you want an individual to be able to enter data into a specific instrument, but you do not want them to be able to edit the responses of a participant who submitted a survey from a survey view, then you do not want to grant this permission. Moving on to data export rights, those categories are broken into no access, de-identified, which is actually defined on this page, and de-identified just means that all free text form fields will be removed, as well as any date time fields and any identifier fields. Identifier fields meaning any field that has been manually marked as an identifier during the design process within your project. So that's some suggestions that we actually provide during the process that we'll be talking about in a little bit. But virtually any field that you have identified or that a project design staff has identified as an identifier will be removed if you have those de-identified rights, in addition to those freeform text fields and date/time validated fields. Remove all identifier fields, again, intuitive. It just means that we are going to remove all fields that have been marked as an identifier in the designer, while we will be able to still export fields that are date time or things like that that have been excluded in the previous category. And then full dataset privileges means you can export all the data from a given instrument. Now, I want to go ahead and talk about user roles, as this is a really powerful and handy feature. So I can go ahead and on this page, I have the option to create a role. We actually get some examples. So I'm going to go ahead and say PRA. And right, so the benefit of a user role is that we can assign individuals directly to a role when we're adding them to the project with a standardized set of permissions. So as opposed to adding custom rights per individual, we can go ahead and add an individual to a category that we have defined as a role. So we'll go ahead and click Create Role, and we'll get the same user interface we had when we were specifying an individual's user rights through the custom user rights option. But I can go ahead, I'll set up a role. I'll go kind of broad with this. And I'm going to go ahead, click create role at the bottom right once I've set all my selections. And now that is going to appear as a separate category on this page. And also when I'm adding someone to a project and click on this box here next to the assign role button, I'll click here and I'll have the option to assign an individual to one of the roles on the project. Since we only have one, only that PRA is populating right now, but I'll go ahead and select that. I'll click assign. And now we can see my test account has been dropped in this PRA category. The role name will appear on the left-hand side. And if there are multiple individuals under this category, they'll kind of stack together so we can identify who is in a given user role. And the last thing I want to hit on before moving on to our next key feature is going to be just expirations. You can set an expiration for a given user on a project, and what this means is that at the date that we have specified, an individual will no longer be able to access the project. This does not mean they will not be able to access REDCap, but the project where you are configuring their user rights on. So specifically, if you want someone not to be able to access the project after a specific date, you want to go ahead and set an expiration date. You can also leave that as blank to set it to never, and that access will never expire. Of course, their account could get suspended, and that means they wouldn't have access to the project anymore. The real benefit to expiration is that we can still track who has access to our project and when they lost access to the project. Of course, this field can always be edited, but it's a good way as opposed to removing someone from a project. We can go ahead and we can see, this individual was no longer granted project at this date, as opposed to removing them. Their name will just no longer appear on this page. They'll still populate in logging, but there's a little more investigative work you got to do there. We cannot recommend using roles enough as far as user rights is concerned. There are so many times where we've seen folks accidentally assign someone a permission. There's a bunch of checkboxes. It's easy to miss one. It's easy to give one that you're not supposed to give. And right, just using those roles helps control really any data quality issues that you could encounter, prevents data loss, helps you maintain that data quality that you're hoping to get, and avoids data leaks. One last thing is I would recommend working with a colleague if you are using user roles to assign those permissions and have that individual kind of dropped in that role and navigate through the project so you can understand exactly what those different permissions are doing. And again, just making sure that we don't give permissions to folks who shouldn't be receiving them for any reason. Next, I want to talk about randomization in REDCap. I'm going to give a disclaimer that our team can really only speak to the in-application functionality. Study teams and statisticians should collaborate very closely to configure randomization. We can help with the setup, and that's a little bit of what we're going to talk through today, but our team is not present to go ahead and build allocation tables or things of that sort. I would also recommend closely reviewing the documentation, which I'll go ahead and point out now. So within my project on my left-hand sidebar under the applications heading, I will have randomization right here. I'll go ahead and click that and I'll be presented with a page. There's a very brief blurb up here. If we collect more details, we'll get a lot more details about how randomization works. You can also click a video on how to use this page. That video is actually made by CU REDCap alumni Amanda Miller. So if you worked with her in the past, you can hear her do a wonderful narration there. But once we are ready to set up a randomization model in REDCap, we'll go ahead and we'll click Add New Randomization Model. And that's going to go ahead and populate a page with 4 different steps on how to configure randomization. We'll have the opportunity to set up strata, up to 14 different strata. We can also randomize by group or site. So we can select a field that identifies grouping, or if we have data access groups configured on our project, we can go ahead and use that as our strata on site. We can also choose our randomization field. So this is broken up into 2 different categories. We can do open randomization, which means we're selecting a multi-select field like a drop-down menu or a radio button field, not a checkbox field, where individuals can make a single select to choose the group allocation that an individual will be assigned to. So for example, control versus treatment. Alternatively, we can do a concealed blinded randomization model in a REDCap project. In that case, you'll want to select a field that is a text field without any validation, as you'll go ahead and you'll pipe the randomization number into that field through the module using the allocation table. If I select this little drop down, we're also going to get some options around single select multiple choice fields. So you'll see anything that's open for allocation, open allocation versus any fields that are eligible to be used for the blinded allocation. I have a field name randomization dropdown, so I'm going to go ahead and select that. We'll click Save Randomization Model. And we have performed the initial setup step for randomization within our REDCap project. Step 2 is just an opportunity to download some templates and examples that Vanderbilt has provided in the application. So we can go ahead and see what an allocation table might look like. You're not going to want to use these templates one for one. This is just an idea of how to get started and what those tables might look like and how they get coded. You can click any of these buttons to download the example, and it'll show you kind of the different ideas and ways that you can jump off with randomization and REDCap. Step 3 is going to be uploading your allocation table. Some really good details in the user interface here. I'm just going to hit on some key points, which is that we have a development allocation table, and then we have a production allocation table. The development allocation table is something that will be booted in to allow us to vigorously test how randomization is going to work on our project without knowing the actual randomization scheme that is going to be used in production. We want to use two separate tables here, as this will prevent us from kind of gaming and figuring out where participants are going to be randomized, just because the way allocation works in REDCap is the next available slot that the participant record matches to based on the criteria. It's going to be the next available slot that an individual is assigned to. So it goes down the rows within an allocation table rather than just going ahead and randomizing it for you. The other benefit to testing a development table is, right, once you move to production and randomization, we cannot help you modify that allocation table. The only thing we can do is help you append rows to that allocation table. So that means that, right, we will not be able to change any details once you've moved into production. You can add additional allocations, though we encourage you to prepare your project in such a way where you're going to have more allocations than you will have folks to randomize. And this just ensures that you don't have to rely on our team for support in running this randomization module. Last step 4, is setting up automatic triggering options. So there are 3 different options. The classic is manual. That just means that I navigate to a specific page in my project where that field I defined above lives, and I go ahead and I click a randomize button, and that'll randomize our participant. The other 2 trigger options allow us to leverage REDCap logic. So similar to branching logic, we can type in a specific format of this is the condition I want to trigger randomization for. And under this selection, for users with randomized permission only, so bouncing back to that user rights page, an individual is assigned a specific level of permissions, and then they can go ahead, and if they can perform an action that meets the logical criteria defined here, then it'll go ahead and randomize the participant. The other option is trigger logic for all users, and that means anyone, including survey respondents, can meet the defined criteria, and that'll go ahead and randomize a participant record. I'll go ahead and toss it back to Chloe now, as I'm gonna have her talk about multi-language management.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so another useful tool to experiment with while you're in development mode is the multi-language management tool. So this feature can get a little bit complicated depending on your project, but it is extremely powerful. So just kind of thinking to yourself, have you ever received a data set where you had 2 separate columns that represented a single data point, but one was collected in English and then the other one was collected in Spanish, for example? So sometimes it looks like, variable name and then variable name underscore span or something like that. Before this tool was created in REDCap, this was really the only option that was available to our users, just kind of creating those 2 different fields to collect data. But that isn't the case anymore. So the multi-language management tool makes it so that you can keep a single field or a single column and then still display that field in multiple languages for your participants or for your data entry staff, but then ultimately still collecting it in one place rather than multiple. We do have a section of articles that walk you through that whole process and all the considerations, because again, this can be complicated. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to try and keep it pretty simple. So let me pull over my REDCap page. Can you see that REDCap page, Sean?
Yep, perfect.
All right, great. Perfect. Okay, so in this project, you'll see I have this screening form. My screening form is incredibly simple and non-scientific. I am asking about ice cream flavors and your preferred workday of the week. I want to use the MLM to make it so that this ice cream field here is available in both English and Spanish, but it'll all be collected as ice cream underscore or ice underscore cream underscore flavors. So to do that, over to the left under applications, you'll see multi-language management tool. So I will select that. And you will have all this information flooding right at you. So again, this is something to take your time with to learn. This is a good opportunity to mention that there is an end user's guide. So download that. There's a video as well. And then you have all those articles. If you do still come across information you're not sure about, you're welcome to ask. So the first step would be I need to add a new language. The first language I want to add is going to seem counterintuitive. I need to add English. And that's because I need to define a base language. So whatever my instrument is already written in, essentially, what my project is already in. So that's going to be English. You do have these system available languages. We have 4 of them. Basically, what that's going to do is things aside from custom instruments, right? That you would need to provide your own translations regardless for a custom instrument that you've made. But user interface items, right? Home, setup, codebook, those are all things that are in every project. And so using these system languages can automatically define those translations for you. And that makes it so that you don't have to do quite as much work. So I will select English from our system languages, and I'll keep this ISO code that I'm given. I'll add that, and then I need to make it active. And I'll save my changes. All right, and then I need to add my other language that I'd like to use. So I will select Spanish. And then once again, I will keep that ISO code and I will add it in, turn it active, and save my changes. You'll see lots of different tabs at the top. Again, we're not going to cover all of these. For today, we're just going to focus on forms and surveys. Another thing that might seem a little counterintuitive is that you'll see all these little toggle buttons and that I'm currently on English. Once again, just like the fallback or the base language that we just established, we do need to turn it on when we're using MLM for an instrument. If we want that base language available, we need to actively toggle it on. So I'll do that for English. And I'm just going to do screening for now. And I'll go to my Spanish tab here. And I will turn it on for data entry and survey for my screening form. So now my screening form will have both English and Spanish options, but now I need to provide those translations. So staying on the Spanish page, I'll click to translate my items. And you'll see all of this red here. That's really just the MLM telling you I don't have translations for any of these things, right? For the purposes of this presentation, I will just translate this ice cream item and we won't do preferred workday. So, and something to mention here is that neither of us are Spanish speaking, so I do apologize if this is poorly translated. This is just for demonstration purposes. So I'll paste in my translation that I had over here in my other file, and you'll see this turn green. So it'll actively, the system will essentially try and let you know once something's been completed. So I'm just going to paste in my translations here, where it says enter translation. Now, a little side note is that some fields, you might have spent a lot of time in the rich text editor, right, doing all this formatting, and you don't want to ruin that for your translation. So to accommodate for that, you can also use a rich text editor here. So you have all of the options available to you that you would when you're creating a typical field. So now this item is green for us. So I'm going to save those changes. And now that item should be all set. So to demonstrate this, let me open our survey. All right, so now what we have here, we kept it as simple as possible. So there's lots of different ways that you could potentially select language, but the default will be this language widget that you're seeing up here. So you see English here, and then I can select it to change the language. And now I can select Spanish. So I'll select that, and you can see this item automatically translate into those translations that I provided. And even the submit button, this was something that automatically translated because we selected a system provided language. So if I come back here and I go into something like user interface, you can see a lot of things will already have translations. When I switch to Spanish, that would help. You'll see it already has translations here for me, lots of green on the page that I didn't have to do anything for. All right, so now I will hand it back to Sean to talk about moving your project to production.
Thank you, Chloe. A sec, just let me know if you see that.
It's there.
Incredible. So now I want to kind of walk you through what moving to production looks like, taking that step to that next stage, and also kind of review what it means to move to production. So I just need to reinforce it, and we will say it all the time. Chloe's already said it. We're going to keep saying it for the rest of our time in this position. You should move to production before you begin to collect real data. This is just because it introduces additional safeguards. Chloe will talk in a bit, but we want to make sure that you know that. Moving to production should also occur after you've completed a full design of your project. Obviously, things can change, but once you're comfortable with where your project is at, you've thoroughly tested that project, gone through data entry forms, survey submissions, the way you want to send out surveys. Test all of that, and then you'll be able to move to production. And this is a four-step process, and we're going to review what this looks like in the user interface and then a slide as well. So let me pivot to my browser. Wonderful. Chloe, you can see that all right, right?
Yep.
Excellent. So within my project, if I navigate to the setup page, so under project home and design on my project sidebar, I click setup, I'll end up on the page I'm currently on. And one thing that you'll notice is we actually have the option to go through and click kind of a checklist of all the different features that we have in our project. So going down the line, I can click this little I'm done button. This doesn't have any utility. Our team doesn't look at it, but it is kind of just a checklist of, oh, I've done all the things I need to do before I move to production, including test thoroughly, which again, please do. I'll go ahead and click I'm done there. And then at the very bottom of this page, there's the Move Project to Production button. I'll go ahead and click that. And I'm met with two different options as well as some informational text that I definitely recommend reviewing. But I have two options. I can either keep the existing data within the project or I can delete all data from the project. All data does include things like calendar events, documents uploaded to forms or surveys, and there are cases where it might be appropriate to keep records. They are far and few between. There are cases where, for whatever reason, you might have had to collect at least one record right before you move to production. We get it, and that's why this keep all data saved option is there. If I click delete all data in the project and I click this yes, move to production status, I'm going to get a confirmation message saying, hey, are you sure you're okay with all that being deleted? I'll go ahead and click cancel because we don't want to delete this today. And if I click keep, we'll click this again. And actually we get a specific message if randomization is enabled. And it's just letting us know, hey, your dev table is going to be tossed. You're moving to your prod table, heads up. I'll go ahead and click OK. And then that's going to trigger a request to our team. You will not get the message you just got. I got that because I'm an admin. But if we go back to our slides, you will receive automatically an email that is triggered by our ticketing system that just lets you know, hey, a ticket was created on your behalf. We are going to start reviewing your project for production shortly. Once we get to that, you're going to go ahead and you're going to get a notification that either myself or Chloe has started working on your request and let you know that we'll reach out as soon as possible. Once we've had a chance to review, we're going to go ahead and we're going to reply with what we call an admin audit. Chloe and I run two different sets of code to check for different identifiers, as well as a manual review, to check for identifiers and opportunities for validation within your project. So anything that might be an identifier that you didn't mark as such, we will go ahead and say, hey, you might want to consider marking this field. Of course, at the end of the day, you have the context around all of these fields, whether it comes to identifiers or validation. There might be a reason that we are not aware of that you have chosen not to make the selection, but we're still going to provide that recommendation just so we can try to keep you compliant wherever possible. As you can see here further down, we are also providing validation recommendations in specific categories, right? So we'll suggest that you add number integer validation to a field where it's appropriate. If you have an email field, we might provide a suggestion there. We also have some disclaimers in here. But once you have reviewed all of our recommendations, you've made the modifications you want to make based on those recommendations, and you've reviewed your project closely, we'll ask that you please complete a brief form, and that'll trigger us to move your project into production. That form is going to look a little something like this. It's just a quick summary of information to one, make sure that your project is acceptable use. So are we allowed to actually host the project? You'll also go through a screening of one of these when you create your project. This is just the second level of that. It also ensures that we are able to just review and get in touch with teams in the scenario where it is absolutely necessary to do so, and no other means within the project kind of give us that information. So you'll submit this form, we'll get another ticket, and once we've reviewed that form, we'll go ahead and we're going to merge that new ticket into your existing ticket. So you'll be notified once we have moved your project officially into production. You're going to get a thank you from our team. We'll follow up if there's any issues as well, but we'll notify you, hey, your project's been moved to production. If anything else comes up, here's how to get in touch with us. But once you have done that, you are officially going to be in production. Right, so now that we've submitted our request and that's been processed by our team, we'll go ahead and we'll have officially moved into production. Oh goodness, I have an Amber Alert going on my phone. That's terrifying. Okay, cool. We're good. Um, So production. Should a project should absolutely remain in production the entire time you're collecting data. Production enforces additional safeguards introduced to prevent data loss. So things like variable renaming, event renaming, enabling instruments or disabling instruments as surveys across the project. All of these things are no longer possible in production, and that's just to prevent unexpected data loss, orphaning, or degradation or loss of data. You can determine if a project is in production on your My Projects page based on that icon. So the one you saw earlier when we were chatting and Chloe had you drop a response in the chat. That green little checkbox means that our project is in production. I'll now go ahead and hand it over to Chloe and she can talk about some feature highlights in production.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect. All right. So keep in mind that you should have already decided on and tested your data collection methods during development mode. One super simple option, it's typically used with screening instruments, is a public survey link, and that can be either a link or a QR code. And that will take you to your first, or a participant to your first occurring instrument as a survey. And that instrument has to be a survey in order to use that tool. So for the purposes of our next features, you're welcome to go ahead and scan the QR code, make a few submissions to the survey if you'd like. I am going to move us past the slide just because I want to keep things moving and I want to make sure we have time for questions. So no worries if you don't get to that. So let's say that I've collected all of the data that I did during production, and then I have a few changes that I want to make. I don't like my ice cream field anymore. I need to make a change. It's not going to be quite as simple as it was in development mode. And that's because I have data that the system now wants to help me protect. So in order to make those changes, I'm going to have to go into something called draft mode. Pull up my REDCap screen. See that all right, Sean?
Yep.
All right, let me refresh since we went into production, and you'll see this yellow window here that says enter draft mode. Changes that you make during draft mode are not automatically live in your project, at least most changes. Now, there are changes that do not apply to draft mode. I would say stay safe. The MLM and the designing of your instruments, those will apply to draft mode. So let me start with, right, like I said, I wanted to make a change to the screening form. So I will open that now that I'm in draft mode. And my ice cream form, or my ice cream item, let's say that this contributed to, for example, me giving people flavors of ice cream, and we are all fresh out of cookies and cream. So now, instead of cookies and cream, I'd like to offer cookie dough. That's Sean's favorite ice cream, so we'll use that. So I've changed that from cookies and cream to cookie dough. This is the wrong way to make that type of change, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But for the purposes of demonstrating, I'll save that information. So my new option, cookie dough, is now available. I'll also add a new field, make it a notes box because I want a bigger answer. And I want to ask, why don't you like ice cream, to the people that say that they don't like ice cream. All right. I'll add some branching logic there. Branching logic is something that while it's captured in the review of your changes that you make in draft mode, they're not automatically live, is kind of what I mean by that. They aren't really captured as a potentially like critical change on your project. So it's not going to say, hey, you might lose data if you make this branching logic change. So we'll talk about a feature in just a second that can help you check on your branching logic changes to make sure that you're not impacting your existing records. If you haven't used branching logic before or you're unfamiliar with syntax in REDCap, this drag and drop builder can be really effective. So what I want, right, is I want when somebody selects, I do not like ice cream, I want this field to show up. So I'll drag that over here to show the field only if this is selected. All right, so now we have that branching logic. Okay, my changes look good to me, but what I can do to make sure that those changes are all set is I can use something called draft preview mode, which is actually a pretty new feature. So when I go to turn it on, I'll get a pop-up. This gives a bunch of information about draft preview mode, and I will highlight a few. So changes that you make to data that you save while you are in draft preview mode are not saved to the project. It's what's called ephemeral data or transient data. It isn't actually saved to your project. But something to highlight is just because you are in draft preview mode does not mean that your colleague is in draft preview mode. It applies only to you. And then only changes to already existing forms can be checked. So if you made a new instrument while you're in draft mode, you're not going to be able to check that. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is that it doesn't work on survey pages. So this is only going to work on your data entry screens. All right, and then of course I do recommend looking through the rest of this information to make sure that you understand draft preview mode, but just so that we can keep moving, I will turn on draft preview mode so that we can look at the changes that I made in action. So I'll go back here and we have some records here in the project, right? So I'll go to the screening form and you'll see here I get lots of warnings that I'm in draft preview mode. All right, so I will check record 1 with my changes live in my draft preview mode. Looking at record 1, it has I do not like ice cream selected. And great, my notes box, as I intended, is appearing to ask, why don't you like ice cream? So that looks fine. I don't have an issue there. Let's check record 2. Record 2 did not select I do not like ice cream, and it doesn't have that notes box. So that is also good. That looks great. However, record 2 was entered a while ago and cookie dough is selected, and I just introduced that option. So that is an indication that I have done something wrong. So what I'll do is I will go back to our designer and I'll make some changes. But before we do that, let me kind of show you where you can go to say, okay, this looks wrong. Let me go review the changes that I've made. There's this link on your designer page that will say view detailed summary of all drafted changes. We do have guides on this in our help center that are linked in your slides. You'll see that it says total potential critical issues is 1. And then I can look elsewhere on this page depending on where that critical issue is showing up to determine what that critical issue is. So where I'm seeing this 1 show up is that it's potentially critical issues in modified fields that already contain data. But I can scroll down here and see this red text here that says possible label mismatch because of label changes. Check if okay. If you select compare, you'll get this pop-up and you can get an idea of kind of what's going on here, right? So on the left, you'll see existing value and the existing label. So that's what your project currently is live facing survey participants. And then on the right, you'll see your drafted value and your drafted labels. So the changes that you've made. So the issue here is that REDCap stores these responses as raw values. It doesn't store them as labels. So since I've replaced cookies and cream, which has the raw value of 6, with cookie dough, which now has the raw value of 6, anybody who selected cookies and cream now has selected cookie dough if I go through with these changes. So the appropriate way of changing this, and I can see that 1 record was affected by that. So rather than push those changes, what I can do I can go into screening. I'm going to turn off my draft preview mode. And I can make this change more appropriately. So this was cookies and cream. And then if I wanted to add cookie dough, I would add a new raw value. And then understandable that you wouldn't want this at the very bottom of your list. That's okay. REDCap isn't going to order it based off of the raw value. You can just copy that and put it wherever you'd like it. So if I wanted that just below cookies and cream, now I have cookie dough just below cookies and cream. And then, I wanted to hide cookies and cream. I still don't want that to be available for future participants. You can add a action tag that is called hide choice. And this will hide the choice associated with the raw value of 6. So I can save that. I can go back and review my changes, and now I have 0 critical issues. My changes will actually be automatically approved. I don't even have to worry about admins having to review it. And if I push this change, then I can look back at some of these. Cookie dough is only available here, right? But we know that record 2 selected cookies and cream is now here as well. So it'll stay retained and visible for people that already selected that option, but it will hide it for future participants or anybody who hadn't selected that option. So that'll retain your data while still giving you the functionality that you need. Last thing on this is just that, not all changes, like I said, are subject to draft mode. So some changes are made live to your project as you change them rather than some review process, right? Had I gone through with those critical changes, similar to that move to production process, that request would come to us. We would discuss with you to make sure that you understand all the changes that you're making and how they might impact your project. And then you could respond to us and we could proceed as needed. But with that, right, there are changes that do not go through that type of review process. So those are things like survey settings or automated invitation settings. The system really only flags changes that are potentially critical at the time of committing the change. So the moment that the change is accepted, that data is impacted. A great example is, like I said, branching logic. That would later prompt a user to remove data from a field, but it's not critical at the time that you commit the change. So that's not something that's going to be alerted on that page. It's just too complex. So that's really where that draft preview mode feature comes in handy, and you can review those changes and make sure that you're not impacting projects and getting those pop-up warnings that data is going to be removed from existing records. All right, back to Sean to finish up with our last 2 phases.
You see that all right, Chloe?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So the stage after production, the name again is kind of obvious what it is, analysis slash cleanup. So that is the stage we'll move to once we are done with being in production and we are ready to kind of start cleaning up that data. We're ready to start analysis. We will move to analysis slash cleanup mode. So this prevents survey submissions and project modifications from occurring. You'll also have the option to launch project data, so no new records could be entered. Exporting data is still permissible. There's also new appearance on the My Projects page. We have a new icon, the little red circle with a dash in between it. Um, Interestingly enough, you can return to production without admin support. So as opposed to development to production where you need an admin, you can go ahead and freely move between analysis slash cleanup and production as you need. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick demo of what this process looks like. Chloe, just let me know when this populates.
You're all set.
Cool. So navigating for the project setup page, I can click on the other functionality tab. And that is going to take us to a page with a few different options if my browser wants to load. There we go. Where I'll have this button to click move to analysis slash cleanup status. I'll go ahead and click this and I'll get a prompt. Am I sure I want to do this? Yes, let's move to this new phase or status. The page will reload and I'll get notified and some new UI elements will pop up. So we can see here, as I mentioned, I can move back to production status by just clicking one button. I'll get another confirmation message, but that's really straightforward. I'll also get a summary of what happens when we go to analysis of cleanup status. And I also have the option to either make the project still editable, so being able to modify existing records, or I can set the project to read only / locked, which means I won't be able to make modifications to existing records. Really quick, I just want to show you what moving analysis / cleanup does functionally. So if I hop to a survey page in my project, I will go ahead and get a message that says, thank you for your interest, but the survey is not currently active. That's going to happen with all survey links on this project once you have moved to this project status. Similarly, if I head over to the designer, I'm going to get notified that this page can really only be accessed in dev or prod. That's because we don't want folks to be able to modify instruments if those instruments are no longer collecting data. And there are a few other thoughts this will populate. We won't be able to add new records. Typically, we'd have an add new record button here or an add / edit records page here. Additionally, we won't have the data import tool available for us anymore, even if we have that permission enabled. The thing is, and this goes back to that kind of edit option, I am still able to enter and modify existing data, right? So this is a record without any submissions. I can go ahead and I can update that. If I hop into an existing record, I can still modify that data as according with my permissions. However, if I go back to that other functionality page, or even the project setup page, and set all project data as read-only / locked, I will go ahead and I will have read-only access to all of my instruments. Let's pop into actually the one we've already had open, that screening form for this record. And you can see here, I can't touch anything. I won't be able to modify responses. And the same is true of even this incomplete instrument. So this will prevent any access to the existing data. And we'll go ahead and just move on to the final stage from here. So same thing, other functionality page, we can go ahead and mark a project as completed. I'm just going to pivot to the slides for just a second. So that completed status is our final stage of the project. It is much shorter than any of the other stages. Important things to highlight is your project will continue, or your data will continue to be retained within REDCap. Moving your project to a completed status does not delete your data. Your project is going to remain in completion status indefinitely. We currently don't even have a retention policy in place, so it is up to your team to retain or remove data as according to your protocol. Moving a project to completed will prevent any access to the project. I'll display what that looks like in just a second. Your project's also placed in a specific folder on your My Projects page. A unique symbol will pop up, a little file box there on the My Projects page to symbolize that we have moved to that completion status. And it's important to note that a project can be returned to or taken out of completed status at any time with the support of an admin. So let's go ahead and pop back over to REDCap. And I'll go ahead and mark my project as completed. I'll get a prompt, hey, are you sure? We'll say yes. It'll let you know only an admin can help. And now when I'm on my Projects page, I can click Show Completed Projects. And that'll go ahead and reload the user interface, and we can see all of the practices I did for this presentation, as well as the project that we were looking at. It'll say completed here. And if I try to open up that project, I'm going to get a message that says, hey, the project's been marked as completed. If it was marked as completed by a mistake, go ahead and get in touch with the REDCap admin team. Also, we'll get a date and time as to when it was marked as completed and by who. That way we can go ahead and we can speak to those folks before speaking with REDCap admins, just in case there is any reason that this should have happened. But our team can go ahead and click one button and get you back out of that completion status if needed. I'll go ahead and hand it to Chloe to wrap up.
Yeah, so I'll make this quick because I do want to make sure we can answer questions. So if you do want to throw some questions in the chat while I'm doing this last thing, please feel welcome. Did just want to thank everybody for listening to our presentation. A few last minute things on this slide. You'll have a link to our help center. If you have any questions for our team, please feel free to contact us. We're not able to manage requests via direct email due to our volume of requests that we get, but that Help Center has a method of submitting a ticket to us, and it also has tons of articles to search through. So please go ahead and take a look at that. And then just a reminder to complete that attendance link that Lauren put in the chat.
Thank you both so much. Sorry about my voice. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat. I definitely learned a lot today, so thank you. I'm excited to try out the multi-language feature there.
Thank you all for having us. We really do appreciate it. And I know we're tight on time and folks probably have to hop, and I know it's kind of lunch hour too. I dropped a link to the ticketing system as well if you want to open that up. On your end, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them there. We are always happy to chat. That is absolutely what we're here for. That is the resource that we provide. And we love talking about REDCap, so we really do appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
And thanks, Lauren, for all your work to put together CU Data Week. I hope everybody enjoys.
Yeah, thank you.